we eventually hear the news that, you know, your heart's still beating at 225 beats a minute mark. This has been 12, 15 days now. Like, we can't keep this up. Any day your heart could stop tomorrow. And if it stops, like, there's nothing we can do at that point. Like, we don't have a heart ready.
Welcome to When You Look, where ordinary people share their extraordinary experiences, and you get to decide, was it coincidence or God? Mark, welcome to When You Look. So great to have you on the show, man.
Thanks for having me here, Mick. I'm really excited about this today.
Oh, man, 100%. Your story is amazing. We are super pumped to hear it, but we got to get to know you first. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Mark Wilson. I live in the Richmond, Virginia area. I'm a local business owner, father of two wonderful kids, an awesome wife. Just a little bit about me. And used to be, I call myself an ex-marathon runner. Once kids came, it makes it a little bit harder. Enjoy scuba diving and loved hanging out with our family at the river. So
awesome. Well, it sounds like there's some adventure there and certainly some athleticism in the marathoning. And so I think that's going to play in as well. So thanks for a little bit of insight there. Well, you've got an amazing story, as I just mentioned. But as we get into that story, give us a little bit of the backstory and then walk us through things as they went for you.
Yeah. So, years ago, I was a marathon runner and ran a lot. And it was just one of my things to do every day was get up. It was part of that daily routine. Get up, run, have breakfast, go to work, go to school, go to church, whatever that may be each day. It just became part of me. And, as I got older, we had kids and, it wasn't enough time to have those days, but I still tried to run and just not run the distances. Back in early 2019, I started noticing some changes. Obviously I couldn't keep up with the pack of people I ran with. And that was very odd because I normally led the pack or was in the front. And that went from running to barely being able to walk and then just stopped going completely. And, that all happened in a period of a couple months. And it was rather odd. And at first you play it off and you just think, I need a little rest. Maybe I'm worn down, I'm tired. So you kind of just go with that and let your body tell you that maybe you need a rest. And as that kind of rested, I started resting more and more and just didn't really get back into running. I just couldn't really get back up. I couldn't get even a decent pace. And I was winded just, doing simple routines, walking up the stairs, on a 2-story house, going to the mailbox or taking a walk. And it didn't make sense, but I just kept thinking, well, this is the 40s. Welcome to being in the 40s, and you kind of laugh about it, and as men, we don't like to go to the doctor and, we just think we'll figure it out. Later on in 2019, we were blessed enough to purchase a riverfront property and, something we'd always dreamed to do. And it was a fixer upper. It needed a lot of work. It was one of those properties that, you would call the ugly home on the neighborhood, but we were excited. We knew we could handle it. And, we closed on this property in June and we started working on it. We had friends and family down. We were, painting and doing flooring and all those things you do when you buy a new property to make it your own. And, that's kind of when we really started noticing that my energy level was just non-existent. One particular day, we were about a week or two before July 4th, we were down there working and just, we're inside, we're laying down laminate flooring, we're painting, and I'm just sweating and I'm just, you know, wiping myself off with like towels and I'm like, like it's 70 degrees in here. Why is this happening? And it was a really weird feeling. And it just continued over the whole weekend. And I just thought, man, I'm really burnt out. I really need a break, a rest. I need to figure something out. And throughout that weekend, everything I did, it was just way more energy taken from me than it should have been. And we went to dinner at a local place one night, kind of wrapping up our weekend. And, it was a later dinner than normal after working all day. And I picked my son up out of the car because he had fell asleep on the way home. And, regardless, this is probably a 20-yard walk from the driveway to the front door. And I couldn't make it to the front door. No steps, just standard walking. And it kind of was like, whoa. And I had to sit down on the front step. And, my wife took my son and was like, what's up? And I'm like, I don't know. I just, I'm really exhausted. And, of course, I don't want to tell her that I'm, wasn't out of breath, but I just really, really was beat down and just really tired. And, went to bed that day. And, that was kind of ending the weekend. And the next day I was like, hey, honey, I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. And, she shakes her head and says, what? You don't go to the doctor. And I'm like, yeah, I don't feel good. Something's not right. And you knew. But, we also, as, sometimes kind of ignore those conditions and kind of ignore them and play through them. So, I was thinking they were going to say, hey, you have, some kind of flu or something that, you just
Mm.
need to take a rest. That's why you're not able to, really kind of pay attention to that. But, at the other side, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. And I was wearing my Apple Watch all weekend. I was, just kind of keeping track of time. And, being an avid runner in the past, I used to always keep track of heart rate and things. And, I kept looking at the watch and it said like 225 beats a minute. And I was like, tapping on it thinking, well, this thing needs to be charged or it needs an update. That surely ain't right. And there's no way
Yeah.
that, you can live at 225 beats a minute. So I ignored that sign too all weekend. And as I'm driving home, I keep looking at it and it's just, still saying 200 to 220. And I'm like, well, I guess I need to get a new watch or I need to sync it. I go home, do our thing. We drop off and the next day I get up and I go to the doctor first thing. And, I just go to a local hospital just to get checked in because I didn't really figure it was more, it was easier to do that than it was to go to to set an appointment with my doctor. And walked in, sat in the triage spot. She took my heart rate. She thought something was wrong. She looked at somebody else. Somebody else came in. They looked at it and they said, take him back to the, admit him immediately. And then they were like, are you aware that your heart rate's 220 beats a minute? And I said, well, my watch said that, but I didn't really think it was true. And, you shouldn't be able to have that kind of heart rate. And, we kind of talked a little bit and they immediately admitted me. And this was I realized, well, my watch was right and I was wrong at that point. So it's one of those things that you kind of look back now and technology did help, but I didn't really didn't want to listen to it. Um, from there they admitted me in the hospital, and the cardiologist started looking through things, and they were running tests trying to figure it out, and they were amazed that I couldn't feel the palpitations and the things
Mm.
happening that, I should have been feeling. And I said, well, I'm not. And I kind of explained the thing that I used to run marathons for fun and, it was nothing for me. And I knew what my average heart rates were when I was running, when I was resting. So they were like, well, still like this is excessive, and we need to figure it out. Stayed at one hospital for a week. They did a heart cath. They couldn't figure things out. They then sent me to one of their sister
Wow.
hospitals and they were able to do a little bit more extensive testing. They really weren't sure, and they wanted to basically send me home with a device and just kind of monitor it and then set another appointment for a different cardiologist. Um, we didn't like that answer, and we didn't like that they weren't sure what the answer was. So it's a little scary when they immediately admit you and don't let you leave for 7 days. You feel like you need to go home with something better than an insurance policy that this might work, this may not. So we had some friends that knew some people at our VCU MCV hospital in Richmond, and we basically made a request to go there, and we were transferred there, and once we got there, it was a totally different scenario. And they were able to, they're a research hospital as well. So they were able to really figure out what's going on, what was happening. They were able to pinpoint the issue exactly. And, once they did, they said, hey, this is a very rare issue and this
Mm.
is typically untreatable. And,
Mm.
we're going to have to do some extensive testing. And since we are a learning hospital that, we're going to do some things experimentatory that hopefully will, we'll kick this. And, I don't remember all the testing, but it was, shots through the back of your neck and different things that you would think, is that really a good idea to be shooting it that close to my nerves? But, you know, eh, you're in their
Wow.
hands, you're trusting them, you have faith in God, you know that hey, I'm at the right spot. They know what they're doing. They're really getting to the bottom of things, and we're getting more answers here in 3 or 4 days than we did, 10 days somewhere else. So we're just going through the motions. We're thinking things are okay. And as they finally figure out what it is, they give us the diagnosis. It's a thing called giant cell. It's a very rare heart disease, and it's nothing to do with hereditary. It just happens to certain people. And they believe that that could happen based on, like people that do long distance runnings, ultra marathoners, elite athletes. At that point, I was no longer an elite athlete because I had been kind of taking off. But they're thinking that a virus got in my heart, and your heart is the warmest, muscle in your body, and it's really hard to get rid of a virus once it's in your heart. And I think that was the continuation of how I started to feel slowly going downhill, as it was constantly and slowly degrading, my heart. So,
Wow.
that was kind of the starting point of realizing that this was a bigger issue, and I was going to be here a while, and we were going to have to really, figure that out. So we kind of took the next step, and they said, hey, we want to do one or two things, and then if not, we will put you on a transplant list, for a heart
Mm.
transplant. You know,
Wow.
regardless, at this point, you got to think, I'm in my early 40s. I had two small kids that are, 2 and 4 at that time, or, 2 and 5. You know, you're not thinking this is something that should be happening to somebody at this age, especially knowing, 5 years before I was running marathons every day, and, or not every day, but, all the time. And I was running, you were in way better health. So you just don't think that's going to happen to you. And, when you hear that, it's kind of a big letdown, but you also know that you just got to have faith and you got to keep moving forward. So from there, I think a lot of the steps were, for us to try to figure out what to do. And, as they tried those particular procedures, we would have to wait a couple days. We'd have to do more blood work and, kind of see what the testing results were working and not working. As we realized each test wasn't working, and, we were closer and closer to getting to that, hey, you need a transplant. It became really scary for the family, my immediate family, my brother and family and his kids, and just realizing that this situation is not just, hey, he might have a heart issue and might need a stent, or, or a bypass. This is now looking at a full transplant, and, a bigger issue that no one saw coming. So, um, from that point, the hospital's on a different schedule now. They're looking at no longer, hey, this is something that can be treated. We're now looking at a replacement. They're looking at, does he have the mental aptitude to want to take medicine the rest of his life? Does he have the financial ability to be able to have insurance that's going to help with covering this? The aspects of just, what's going to be affected and how this is going to affect your life. So it's almost like you're in a psychology meeting. There's a lot of those things that really work through that over the next couple days of what can you do? What are you going to be okay with this? And obviously
Yeah.
it's a very expensive procedure. So they want to make sure that they're not going to be wasting somebody else's donation on somebody who's not willing to do that, or, you know, just make sure that it's you're a good fit. So as that process goes through, we're praying, we're hoping, we're wishing that, everything happens, and it happens on the time it's needed. That's the only thing you can do. Um, you know, we eventually hear the news that, you know, um, your heart's still beating at 225 beats a minute, Mark. This has been 12, 15 days now. Like, we can't keep this up. Any day your heart could stop tomorrow. And if it stops, like, there's nothing we can do at that point. Like, we don't have a heart ready. So we're going to have to put you on ECMO. Basically the easiest way to explain ECMO is it's like a small portable generator that basically
Mm.
recirculates your blood. Um, Normally when you go on ECMO, it is one of those devices that you're not normally awake, and they normally put people to sleep and they run ECMO, and then they wait for, a heart or a lung or whatever transplant you're getting. But because I couldn't tell that I was having heart issues and I was acting normal and walking around, they kept me awake and I was on ECMO, and, you know, um, they just used that device to recirculate my blood, which gave me a longer availability to actually be able to, get on a heart and be able to get a heart transplant. Once that happened, it's amazing because, the best way to describe it is it's a little machine, but it has a garden hose that gets hooked into your main artery. And it's weird. You're sitting here looking at a machine that's circulating your blood, and then they say, well, hey, Mark, we want to see if you can walk with this machine. And I'm like, right. Okay. That's funny. He's like, no, seriously. Like, the amount of downtime you're going to have is huge because of this procedure. You're in great shape. You're still able to, you're awake, like, we're going to
Mm.
get a special bed that can pick you up completely. And then you can just step out of the bed while you're vertical, and we're going to walk around the hall, and we're going to do this, to keep some exercise, because at this point, every day you stay laying down, you lose muscle, you lose energy, and uh, it just sounded good. And I'm like, well, sure, like how hard can this be? Little did I know that you're basically pushing a large generator next to you. You have devices, and I'm hooked to oxygen and air and blood sensors, and not to mention the garden hose that is basically hanging out of you that you have to walk around with. I didn't really ask. I just said, if that's what you think I need to do, that's what I need to do. And little would I know later that it turns out to be a pretty major thing to even have ECMO, and and also be walking around the hospital ward. There's some unique videos of that on my wife's Facebook page that
Hmm.
it's really quite moving to see. And to kind of think about it now, knowing what it is, it's really weird to be like, wow, I walked through this hospital, and you know, it's like everybody came out of their rooms and met, and they, clapped and said, "Hey, this is awesome. Congratulations." And then I started realizing this is a lot bigger than they say it is. This isn't just for my exercise. This is, VCU also knowing that, this is a breakthrough. This is a really cool, technology. This is a really neat thing that you're doing. It's really unique that this person has this heart rate and is still, here.
Hmm.
Um, the doctors to this day, my cardiologists to this day, still think that all of that running I did, all of those marathons I did, all that training is what really saved me. They think that, with giant cell, it slowly degrades your heart, and, it would have taken me eventually. So, knowing that and seeing that, really helped me, because had it not been maybe as in better shape back then, maybe things could be totally different. I maybe would not have seen the signs and the symptoms on the wall, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, blessed for that 100%. I now consider myself an ex-runner and an ex-marathoner, but that's okay. It's kind of a running joke. We laugh and said, you tried to kill me once. We're not going to go for attempt number two. But, as people that run can tell you, it's definitely a mental high. It's a place you're at when you're running and you do that you really, really enjoy. And it's really hard to cut that out. And for me, it's been hard, but, we'll find other things that we enjoy doing, and go from there. So, once the ECMO was on that list, and we kind of got back and, got into it, the doctor said that, the matching of hearts is not just any heart. There's size of that person versus size of me, size of their aorta, and all the other parts of it that, have to kind of be tied in. And they really didn't know, if I would be waiting days, weeks, months. And, we're just thinking, okay, we're in it. And, I'm a business owner, so I have some of my staff that's calling me saying, "Hey, boss, we got to pay this. Hey, boss, we got this coming up. What about this?" And they're coming to the hospital, bringing paperwork. I'm on my laptop, hooked to machines, and it's almost like life is normal. It's weird to say now, but it's part of what happened. And while the team did great and they took care of most everything there were still things as a business owner that you had to do, and they were coming in to help with. And I think a lot of them would take turns bringing things just so they could all see me. That was important. So it was kind of their way of saying, well, we don't want to bother him, but if you bring something today, you bring something tomorrow, we can just keep rotating between all the employees and staff, and everybody can come and see me. So it was great to see them as well, and be able to show them that, hey, I'm here, I'm okay, I'm fine. Just let's just keep going forward. Um, it's really crazy, experience when you look back on it, and just how things changed and how quickly that happened. Once we went on the transplant list, um, it became really, really serious, and we really started thinking about it. There was a lot more praying, that I've probably ever done. God was probably like, "Hey, Mark, I hear you. This is the 75th today. Like, it's
Mm.
okay. I hear you." But, at that time, you're just, you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can, and everybody's praying for you as well. I remember, my attorney coming to the hospital thinking, hey, let's make sure that we have things in affairs, squared away in case the worst happens. You want to make sure that your business has this, and, we have POA for this, and, medical directives, and things that you're not thinking about when you're normal and you're 40 and you're running around with your family. So a lot of those
Yeah.
things that, you normally think, well, I'm going to do when I'm older, when I start retiring, we're preparing for those things now. And, we're going through the checking accounts with my wife, and hey, make sure you have access to this account and that account. And she's like, well, I don't even know what that account is. So while it's funny and we're laughing through it, we started to realize that, it's just life. We just have to work through it and we have to figure it out. Um, Once we were on that transplant list, we had no idea if it was going to be a couple days or a couple months. We later found out after the transplant that once you're on ECMO, it really moves you up to the high of the list. And if there's 40,000 people waiting, you might be in the top 10 or 20 in the country. I
Wow.
don't know the exact numbers, but, we've since found out that ECMO plus, um, you know, relatively in good shape, it really puts you up. The ECMO was, I think what really said that, hey, this person can't live unless this machine's hooked to him. I can't go home where some of the patients could get devices installed or other, jumper packs and different things that they had that allow them to go home and live a life until, with me, I was stuck there until, we had a transplant. So our family's thinking we're going to be here for a while and the kids are going to be visiting every couple of days. And we'll get through it. And, maybe we need to, get a small mini fridge brought in so that we have snacks for like that's what we're thinking. We're here
Mhm.
for a long time. Little do we know that, once we went on that transplant list that, 3 days later, we would, receive the prayer that we wanted so much. So
Wow.
3 days. It's awesome feeling. To this day, it's still really hard to imagine that that happened. And I know the night before, we had a lot of family coming every day, visiting friends. And the night before, we knew that whenever the heart comes, it would come by helicopter. And, we heard a helicopter fly over that night and land. And, we all made a joke saying maybe that's mine. None of us thought it would be, but, we laughed about it thinking it was. And, little to find out later, it was, it was,
Hmm.
it was mine and it was going to be, you know, my heart sometime. That same night, a little bit later on, the surgeon come in the room. You don't meet your surgeon too many times. You meet your surgeon the day before and then normally, the day of. And, when he walked in the room, we all knew. And my mom's like, who's that? I'm like, that's the surgeon. Oh, okay. Like she wasn't connecting one and one. She wasn't realizing that, hey, this is it. This is happening. And I believe it was a Friday night. And, he came in, told us what was happening. They had to do some measurements and all these different things. But, relatively, it looked like we were going to be doing surgery tomorrow morning on Saturday a.m. And that was it. So, really amazing. Really crazy to think about, that, we're thinking we're going to be camping here. We're going to, we're going to be here for a while. And the Lord says, nope, we got other plans for you. So, really cool. It was the next day when they had planned to do that. And we were like, okay. And it was Saturday morning. And I remember that like yesterday that the entire family, all my cousins, my nephews, mom, dad, kids, everybody were there. Some of our friends. It was like a time of fellowship. There was no remorse. There was no worry. It
Hmm.
was just perfect. We all knew it was there and we were ready. And we joked, we sang, we said a prayer, and that was it. No more worry. And to this day, we think that day every day ever since. Um, to be able to, you know, have that gift and, you know, have that transplant done that day, have the surgeons do what they did, and all the care afterwards that, that happens with that is amazing. The aftercare from all the people at VCU and, at first I felt like I should live there after this happened. I'm like, look, you want me here tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday? Can I just stay somewhere and, and just, like if you need me here the next 3 days, why am I going home? But that's the
Yeah.
kind of care that you got. And that's kind of the way it worked. You know, for us, like we were always people of faith, we've always been that way. But when you go through these experiences, it definitely brings you closer and it definitely makes you look at the gifts he's already given you and really realize what's there and what's important. For us, it's been huge. Um, Gifted to have the friends, the family, the people from church that came. It was just amazing. Very blessed person.
Yeah. Mark, there's so much there. Thank you for sharing. Thank you
Absolutely.
for sharing. Let's dive a little bit deeper
Okay.
into a little bit of timeline. Let's start there. So
Okay.
it sounds like it's inside of 2 or 3 weeks from when you first go to the hospital to when you are walking out of a different hospital, but with a new heart. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. And that's the crazy part of this whole procedure is we were working on the house the July 4th weekend. And of course, that's when I really started feeling, just sweating on everything I did. And I knew something was wrong. And of course, being July 4th weekend, I didn't want to go to the hospital that day, like we wanted to get through the weekend. And so we got out of there on the 4th, we came home, and then on the 5th, and then the 6th is the day I went to the hospital. I stayed at one hospital for about 7 days. Then they moved me to another hospital for 2 days, which was a sister hospital. And then we went to VCU after that. And I stayed at VCU all the way up until July 27th is when I received my heart transplant. So, it was about 3 weeks at VCU. And then, of course, we had a rehab and other time. But yeah, so, considering that within a 30-day period, I went from feeling pretty normal to tired to, hey, this isn't right, thinking I'm just have the flu to getting in a major surgery and having a heart transplant in a 30-day window is absolutely crazy. So,
Yeah. And I want to understand a little more about this period of time. So let's maybe focus on like when you're on ECMO, when it's very clear
yeah.
that hey, Mark's on the transplant list. This is a big deal. Like you said, this could be weeks, this could be months. Don't tell us yet about what it was like for you, because that's the second question. What was it? The first question is, what was that like for your family?
Yeah. I could only imagine my wife. I mean, she was strong, very strong, and extremely, not going to say worried, but, very prayerful. She was asking everybody for help, everybody to do this, anybody to, just be praying for us. And, all we could think about was our two kids, wanting them to have a father present, that was the most important thing,
Hmm.
is being there for our kids. Our kids just thought daddy's at the doctor and just another day, So it's funny when you look back now, they look back and they're like, oh, wow, I was really, really small then. I'm like, yeah, you were pretty small, and they kind of remember, but, not to the full extent that we do and we think about, So pretty,
Yeah, and the
pretty
ages
amazing.
that you described certainly helps in that sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
So, what was it like for you during that period of time?
um, and honestly, I don't feel like I was ever worried, which is really weird to say. People say that, I was more worried about what was happening to my family and what could happen to my parents and, all the other people in my family that were worried about me. But I was like, just had this shroud of peace over me. And it was just, like everything's here for a reason. I just got to keep having faith and keep moving forward. And it was amazing that I didn't even really get that upset about it until everything was done. Once I'm done and, you're in recovery is when I really was upset a lot, when I cried a lot, and when I realized what happened. And I don't know, at that point, I just said God made me strong because he knew that I needed to be strong for my family. That's really what it was. And, I look back now and, a lot of us have an inside joke in the family that, I was really strong and, and then of course the transplant that I must have got a woman's heart because I'm a little more emotional now than I was before. So, we go with that and that's our thing. And it's a great laugh, but, and that may be, at this point, we still don't know who our donor is. We've, requested, but at this point we don't know. So
Yeah. Oh, that is quite funny, Mark.
it is pretty funny, and I look at little things that they'll do where, like just shows that my wife would watch and I'd be like, oh, that's kind of now. And I'm like, oh, stop. That's the heart talking, so it's very comical to look back at these things and laugh and say, yeah, maybe, maybe God put that heart in me for a reason, so.
Yeah. So the Shroud of Peace
Mhm.
was was there. It sounds like leading into the operation, and you talked about a pretty joyful or peaceful morning prior to the operation with the whole family there. How long does a procedure like that take?
That was about an 8-hour day. So everybody was there pretty early that morning. And, about 7:30, 8 o'clock, they took me back. And, obviously they're giving reports to my mom and my wife and the family. And, it was about an 8-hour thing. And, from there, the next thing I remember was, I was incubated, had the giant thing in your mouth. And, that evening they're pulling that out and telling me don't talk and don't say anything. And,
Hmm.
you don't really realize I'm thinking I'm still under and I'm waiting for anesthesia or something. And then I realized at some point that no, this is done. I'm here. So amazing.
Yeah. And what is it like to wake up with a new heart?
Um, I think at first it was very emotional. You don't want to say that as time goes on, you don't forget, or you forget and you don't care. But to realize before I wasn't an organ donor, I didn't really know much about it. After that, I encourage everybody to be an organ donor, and have UNOS, was a great reference and a great place to work with as all that happened. So you know at first you're just overwhelmed. And then as you go, you want to help other people. You want to share your story. You want to talk to other people. There was a lady that was in the hospital right after I had my transplant. And my cousin and his wife knew a friend of theirs that lived a few hours away. And she was a little bit older than me, but she was there and waiting for a transplant. And they said, Mark, can you just go talk to her? Now, regardless, I just had my transplant and I got all these things stuck to me, and she's down the hall. She's literally, you know, but, you know, 2 blocks, probably 2 corridors away. And
Yeah.
of course, they want me to walk every day. You don't want to walk because you hurt and you're in pain. But I'm like, well, I need to go talk to this person, and being able to talk to her and, you know, tell her what happened. And, she was a religious person. She understood it. We prayed together. We talked about it. And, I think that was another way that God used me just to say, hey, this is, you need each other right now. You really do. So
Yeah. Praise God.
absolutely.
Mark, I want to come back to that shroud of peace that you talked about. What do you attribute that to?
Oh, I mean, it, it's God 100%. For me, I mean, I've always had a walk with God. And, as we may joke, when we were kids, what did you get up on Sunday morning? You were going to church, whether or not you wanted to, but that's just what you did. And then, I grew that faith later as I got older and accepted him as my Lord and Savior. But, it's always been a part of my life. It's always been something that's there. But, when you, as you get older and things change, you really realize that that's there, and you really realize that that is the only way that I would have ever gotten through this, 100%. So,
Yeah. Wow. So, Mark, man, there's so much here. I'm so grateful for you sharing this story. Um, as we kind of land the plane, we typically ask two questions. The first being, was it coincidence or God? And I've got a pretty good idea of how you're probably going to respond to that.
yeah,
But tell us, inside of 30 days, like you said, going from seemingly healthy to not feeling great to literal new heart, coincidence or God?
God, 100%. There's no other way around it. Absolutely.
And you began, I think, to touch on some of this, but let's explore this a lot more. How has your life changed as a result of all of this?
Oh, lots of ways. I mean, just from more of a service aspect to people, doing whatever
Hmm.
you can to share these experiences, to share with people that God's here. We have to be patient. We have to be mindful. We have to know that He's always listening. We may not get it on the timeline that we want, but that's the advantage of it, is that you just have to have trust and you have to have faith that it'll happen. For our family, it's been huge. It's been a great thing for the kids to understand. They have been a lot closer to God. My wife has been a teacher for 20 years. Our kids have gone to public schools, private schools, Christian schools, and, has continued to push us to keep our kids in Christian schools for that reason. It's brought me and my wife closer together. One of those things that, you know, if you weren't a faithful person, it could be a lot more stress between two people than what it could be. So there's a lot of ways that it really, really helped us and pulled us together for the family. It's helped my mom and dad get back into church, which is important. So
Yeah. Praise
absolutely,
God. Praise
100%,
God.
man.
Thanks. Mark, you and I had coffee, and one of the things that you mentioned when we had coffee was that there was a special someone, if I recall this correctly, that was flying the helicopter. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we don't have 100% proof of it because of how they transplant those organs. But one of my friends, and he works with me, his dad was a pilot, and he's now retired. But his friend is a pilot, a helicopter pilot, and flew organs back and forth. And he had made a call to, my friend's dad and said, "Yeah, I got this call," and came somewhere out of Tennessee, we think, and he was flying a heart to MCV, VCU. And it was the same day, and we're 99% sure it was the same heart. So
Yeah. Pretty wild that there's the friend connection there.
God's always looking over us.
Mark, I want to open it up, man. What else do you want to say? Because I really appreciate the emotion that you're showing, and I
Yeah.
want to honor that.
Well, I think that's the woman's heart now. So, that's the way it is. I don't know. I mean, it's it's an awesome experience. It's not something that you ever want to go through, but I think he put me through this for a reason. And we've learned a lot from it. Our family's grown from it. I think it's awesome to be there. And I try to share this experience, and I've shared it with our people at church, our Sunday school class, friends. I don't think I've gotten through it too many times without a dry eye, unless I give the very, very short, abbreviated 3-minute version, which is like, the Cliff Notes. But unfortunately, that's just part of the story, It is very emotional, and it's not something that people go through. So, it's going to be emotional. So,
Absolutely. Mark, thanks, man.
thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
100%. It's great to have you here. Thank you for sharing. This is powerful. We appreciate it, man. Good to chat.
Thank you.
Was it coincidence or God? You decide for yourself, but I believe you just heard a story for His glory. When You Look is powered by stories just like this, and yours could be next. Go to whenyoulook.com/be a guest or use the link in the description below. Drop us a comment and share this episode with somebody that needs it. Until next time, thanks a bunch for listening and watching, and God bless.